My name is Gianna Sterling, 35 years old, living in Palo Alto, California. That evening, I only intended to attend my younger brother's engagement party, offer congratulations, then quietly slip away like I always did. But when my father stood in the center of the grand hall, beneath the crystal chandeliers, raised his glass of red wine, and declared in front of over 200 guests, "Gianna is no longer a part of this family," I simply smiled, nodded, and walked away. No protest, no tears. 3 hours later, my phone rang. It was the bank. They called to inform me that I was now solely responsible for a $3 million loan that had just defaulted. And that call was the beginning of a series of family secrets I never dared to imagine. Have you ever been cast out by your own blood, only to later discover they'd plotted to throw you off a cliff? If this story resonates with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to share next, you won't be able to look away from. I'm the eldest of the three Sterling children. My mother used to say I was born to keep the family's rhythm. As a child, I was careful, quiet, and more of a listener than a talker. At 18, I was accepted to Stanford University on a full scholarship, majoring in finance, with the dream of one day continuing my father's legacy at Sterling Motors. For 4 years, I studied day and night, always among the top students, trying to prove to him I could be a worthy successor. My father, Richard Sterling, was the founder of Sterling Motors, one of the largest luxury car distribution corporations on the West Coast. In the public eye, he was a model of success, cold but decisive. But within our home, just one glance from him was enough to silence all of us. I never thought his love came with conditions until the day my mother passed away. She died on a March afternoon. The sky was eerily clear, not a single cloud. My mother had been in a car accident while on her way to pick up my youngest brother, Daniel, from his therapy center. By the time the ambulance brought her to the hospital, she was already unconscious. A few hours later, she left us without a word of goodbye. Daniel was only 10 then. He'd already struggled with communication, and the shock of losing our mother pushed him over the edge. Panic attacks came more often. He refused to eat or speak and would sit for hours in the corner of his room holding a small pillow my mom used to leave on the couch. At that time, I had just graduated from college and received an offer for a full-time internship at my father's company. The ink on the contract wasn't even dry when I made a decision he's never forgiven me for. I declined the position, withdrew from Sterling Motors, and stayed home full-time to care for Daniel. When I announced it at a family meeting, my father said just one sentence: "You've chosen to turn your back on your career, so don't come crawling back for anything." I remember the look in his eyes that day. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pain. It was a cold, hollow disappointment, like I had betrayed some sacred pact. The one who replaced me was Blake, my middle brother, whom our mother used to describe as a perfect copy of your father. Blake was dynamic, social, and more than anything, trusted unconditionally by our dad. When I left the company, Blake was sent to Harvard for his MBA, then returned to take the role of vice president of finance. As for me, I began a long journey inside a house that no longer echoed with our mother's voice, with a younger brother battling developmental trauma, and a father who no longer considered me his own. Those years, I didn't live. I existed. Every day was a tightrope routine. Mornings spent taking Daniel to therapy. Afternoons preparing specialized meals. Evenings doing part-time work for a nonprofit to earn some extra income. I had no time for myself. No one ever asked if I was okay. For 4 years, my father never once called. Blake was busy with conferences, business trips, and lavish parties where I was never invited. I used to think time would heal everything, that one day he'd understand why I made the choices I did. But I was wrong. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, Sterling Motors floundered. Sales plummeted, supply chains collapsed, the distribution network froze. Even though I had long left the company, I stayed up all night designing a restructuring plan for the showroom system and a digital transition strategy to move operations online. I didn't just email it, I printed the entire presentation, brought it to company headquarters, and waited 2 hours in the lobby to meet with the board. When I was finally invited in, there were only 3 people present: Blake, an advisor, and Richard himself. I presented for 30 minutes. No detours, no distractions. Every number, every option, meticulously prepared. Blake looked at me like he was seeing a version of me from years ago. He nodded a few times, about to speak, when my father cut him off. I believe we made ourselves clear years ago, Gianna. You chose your path. Don't come back here to save what you no longer belong to. No one said another word. I walked out of that boardroom still smiling as if nothing had happened, but inside I was already shattered. I'm not someone who gives up easily. I used to believe if I tried just a bit harder, stayed patient one more time, they would understand I never betrayed the family. I just followed what felt right, but in their eyes, that was an unforgivable detour. One evening, Daniel had a full-blown panic attack. He shattered every picture frame in the living room, then collapsed on the floor, screaming, "Where's Mom? Where is she? Why won't Dad come back?" I held him until sweat soaked through my shirt, and in that moment I realized I couldn't keep living for someone else's validation. I had chosen to care for my brother. I had chosen a path no one in the family approved of, but I didn't regret it, not because I was strong, but because it was the only thing that kept my heart intact. To this day. 3 years ago, on an early autumn afternoon, before the leaves had fully blanketed the backyard, I received a phone call from my father. When his name appeared on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he had called me in nearly 4 years. "Gianna, I want to meet. There's something I need your help with," he said, his tone calm, as if there had never been distance between us. We arranged to meet at the Sterling Motors office, the place I hadn't stepped foot in since presenting my restructuring plan. The third-floor conference room hadn't changed, cold and private, with tinted glass and the scent of dark leather from the oversized chairs. My father sat there in a gray suit, his eyes sharp as ever, but his voice carried something almost gentler than usual. "I'm preparing to expand into the Texas market. Some of the bank loan paperwork requires a family member as co-guarantor. You just need to sign. It's a formality. Won't affect you in any way." I hesitated. Why me? He didn't answer right away. After a pause, he shrugged and said slowly, "Because you still carry the Sterling name." That answer stirred something in me, not because of its legal weight, but because he acknowledged me as family. He handed me a thick stack of documents in a black leather folder. Each page was marked with a small yellow tab where I needed to sign. I skimmed over the company names, loan amounts, $3 million, and the section for personal guarantee. I looked up and quietly asked, "Are you sure? If I sign, I'll be liable if the company defaults." He folded his arms and looked straight at me. "Gianna, do you really think I'd let you carry the debt? This is Sterling Motors. Everything's stable. It's just paperwork. The bank wants another family name on the file. You sign, you help your father. Maybe it's the first step for us to rebuild, isn't it?" Part of me wanted to ask why not Blake or his wife Barbara, but the other part gripped the pen tightly, swayed by the fragile hope of re-entering the world I once belonged to, not for power, but because I had once been part of it. I signed. No further questions, no backup copy of the contract, and afterward my father gave me a faint hug before returning to his packed schedule and the phone call waiting on his desk. I returned to my everyday life, no dinner invitations, no follow-up calls. The reconciliation I had imagined stopped at that bank contract. 3 years passed and I nearly forgot about signing those papers, until the night I left the engagement party silently and my phone rang close to midnight. "Hello, Ms. Gianna Sterling. This is Wendy Mills, credit officer at South Bay Capital Bank. Sorry for the late call, but this is urgent. Do you have a moment?" I froze in the hallway of my apartment building, my party dress still sparkling under the dim yellow lights. "Yes, I'm here. We want to notify you about commercial loan number 20843X. According to records, you are one of 2 official guarantors on this loan. The other is Mr. Henry Sterling." I frowned. "Henry? My uncle passed away 5 years ago." There was a brief silence on the other end. I'm very sorry to hear that. However, the records still clearly list him as a co-guarantor. Hesitated. Wait, you mean there's no one else besides me and a deceased person? Yes, and I regret to inform you that the loan officially defaulted last week. According to the contract, the entire remaining balance, now $2.97 million, will be transferred to the surviving guarantor. That's you. I was speechless. My legs felt glued to the cold tile floor. Wendy continued, her tone professional but with underlying concern. I understand this is unexpected news. Tomorrow we will send you full copies of the contract, payment history, and related documents for your review. However, we need to confirm whether you have legal representation or a financial advisor to work with. I don't have one yet. I swallowed hard. Is there a way I can review the original contract? Of course, the documents are being prepared to email within the next 12 hours. Also, Miss Sterling, according to our report, the final signature on the file is yours, not Henry's. We are investigating why his name appears on the official document without a valid signature. Wendy's last statement sent a chill through me. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just about being liable for the debt. It was the truth about the person who signed alongside me. Possibly forged, or even completely faked. I hung up, shaken. The wind outside the window howled as if trying to tear down the wall between me and the past. The contract, once described as just a formality, had become an iron chain tightening around my life. And the person who handed me that pen that day may never have intended to give me a way back. The next morning, I arrived at South Bay Capital's downtown branch at the appointed time. The towering glass building stood out amid the busy business district, reminding me of days when I worked as a financial analyst, arms wrapped around my laptop, head buried in balance sheets and numbers more vivid than words. A woman in her early 40s greeted me in the lobby. She had short hair, wore a navy suit, and introduced herself as Amy Carter, the commercial loan officer overseeing my case. We entered a small conference room where dim lighting created a discreet atmosphere. Amy placed a stack of nearly 300 pages before me, neatly bound in a red leather folder labeled Collateral Assets, Sterling Motors South Expansion. First, she began, voice soft yet firm, I want you to understand today's meeting isn't just to review your legal responsibility. I actually requested the bank to re-examine the entire file after noticing discrepancies in the asset reports. I gripped the armrest lightly. You mean the numbers are false? Amy nodded. Or at minimum, systematically inflated. She flipped to an asset listing for the Austin branch. Here, she pointed to a remarks column. It states, this showroom holds a total of 82 vehicles, including new, used, and display cars. The total value is about $5.2 million. I stared intently at the clearly typed lines, a cold ache rising inside. But, according to a field audit conducted 2 weeks ago, Amy continued, we only counted 12 cars. 9 were used, and 3 had expired registrations. I squinted, disbelief filling my ears. Then where are the others? No one knows. On paper, they haven't been sold or transferred. No invoices, no title changes. Yet, none are present in the lot. It's as if they never existed. A sharp headache pierced me. Years studying corporate asset fraud models, yet never imagining I'd witness it in my own father's company, with my signature on the loan documents. Amy turned a few pages. This is the Dallas showroom. The asset list claims over 100 vehicles, nearly $7 million in fixed assets, but at that location, there's only an empty lot, locked doors, no sign. I exhaled softly, dizziness creeping from my neck to my back. Our biggest concern is the Austin showroom, she said, pulling out a business ownership document. I looked down. The listed owner, Joseph Allen Parker. I froze. Joseph was my family's longtime gardener, a kind man in his 60s who'd cared for my father's estate for nearly 20 years. I still remember his image diligently pruning rose bushes on early spring mornings. He rarely spoke and blushed shyly whenever my mother complimented the clean backyard. I whispered to Amy, "You're saying that showroom is under Joseph's name?" Yes, on paper, he is the legal owner of the Austin branch. That's impossible. He doesn't even have a property management license, let alone a commercial business license. Amy nodded, more serious. We thought it was unreasonable too, so we contacted him and learned he had no idea he was listed as owner of any business. He said 2 years ago, someone from the company asked him to sign some administrative papers to receive retirement support. I felt my trust shatter with every word. My father had used the gardener's name to cover a shell company? Does Joseph have copies of those papers? I asked. Yes, and he agreed to cooperate with our investigation. But that also means those documents could be evidence of forged signatures or legal deception. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, trying to find peace amid chaos. The showrooms I once trusted as firm expansion markers were now hollow shells. My name, signed with hopes to mend a family, now appeared on lists holding responsibility for non-existent assets. Emmy spoke gently, as if reading my thoughts. Gianna, I know this is hard to accept, but I want you to understand. All signs point to this not being just a financial failure. This could be a deliberate fraud. I nodded slightly, lips pressed tight. Inside me, something awoke, not the shame of a disowned daughter, but the cold, steady strength of someone who has suffered enough and is beginning to see what must be done to protect herself from one last blow. I met Caleb Monroe on a rainy afternoon at a small coffee shop tucked away on a quiet street in East Palo Alto. The place was nothing remarkable, just old bookshelves and the faint scent of pine that sparked nostalgia. But Amy insisted I pick somewhere discreet. The man I was about to meet might hold the key to the truth my family had tried to hide for 3 years. Caleb Monroe used to be a senior financial director at Sterling Motors, reporting directly to Blake and Richard. 6 months ago, he was abruptly fired. No notice, no transfer meeting, just a brief email of 12 words from the legal department. Contract terminated under confidentiality clause. Effective immediately. I walked into the cafe just in time to see a man in his early 40s wearing a gray shirt and a classic watch sitting in the back corner. When our eyes met, he stood up and shook my hand, his gaze polite yet cautious. "Jana, thank you for coming," he said softly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," I replied, pulling a chair to sit opposite him. We were silent for a few seconds. I didn't want to complicate the story with roundabout introductions. Caleb was someone who used to attend meetings I was no longer invited to. He knew too well what happened behind the door that had long been shut on me. "I'll get straight to the point," I said, gently placing my phone on the table, ready to record if needed. "I'm facing responsibility for a $3 million loan guarantee that Richard, my father, said was just a formality, but now I know it was a trap." Caleb nodded, unsurprised. "I figured sooner or later you'd find out." He pulled a thick envelope from his pocket, slowly unzipped it, and took out a thin stack of papers clipped together. "These are copies of some internal emails I kept. I probably shouldn't have, but getting fired without clear reasons made me suspect something was wrong." I took them, flipping to the first page. The subject line sent chills down my spine. "Ari, proposal to remove Gianna Sterling from ownership succession structure. Urgent process before." Caleb pointed to the bold text. This email was sent by an in-house legal assistant working directly with Richard. "See this line? We need to separate Gianna as far as possible before the SEC expands the investigation to non-executive members." I swallowed hard. "They think I'm a threat?" "Not because you did something wrong," Caleb said slowly, "but because they fear your right to question. They know you studied finance, know your mother entrusted you with partial information about shares while alive, and they know if the SEC targets transfer contracts, Gianna Sterling is an uncontrollable name." I flipped through a few pages quickly, Every line of email was like a blade cutting into memories that once made me feel like the hated child, not a threat to be eliminated. And this, Caleb said, handing another stack of papers, is a confidential internal memo. The date matches when you were asked to sign the loan guarantee. I skimmed it. Option A, use Gianna's signature to secure the loan, but deny her access to operational information. If investigated, shift liability to her as an uninformed party. I looked up. They planned to blame everything on me? Caleb nodded. Not just planned. They prepared a media strategy in case of leaks. There's even a draft press release. Regretting misconduct of a family member who withdrew from the company but still signed financial documents without full understanding. My breath froze. All those years I thought their silence was anger or disappointment. In truth, they were hurriedly building an invisible wall, gradually pushing me out to prevent internal political risks. Caleb sat quietly for a moment, then asked gently, "Do you remember the Waco showroom takeover in 2021? I only heard about it briefly. Blake led that deal." Yes, but in reality, all the investment capital was withdrawn from the joint account, an account in your father's name, but transferred to a legal entity under your Uncle Henry Sterling's name, the one who passed away in 2018. I went numb. They used a deceased person's name to launder transactions? More than once, Caleb leaned toward me. "Gianna, you need to know what they're doing goes beyond normal financial misconduct. This is a deliberately orchestrated network to manipulate records, with a dual purpose: hide illegal transactions and create a responsible scapegoat if things go wrong. You are that scapegoat." I sat silently, hands gripping the cold edge of my coffee cup. "Thank you for keeping these documents," I whispered. Caleb's gaze softened. "I used to respect your father. He was a visionary leader. But once secrecy starts, few know where to stop. I'm talking to you today, not out of revenge, but because I believe you're the only one who understands enough to face the truth." I nodded lightly. I didn't feel like the abandoned child anymore, but as someone standing before a hidden battlefield where trust is no longer a prized asset, but the first thing sold out. Daniel Price's law office was on the 16th floor of a white stone building in downtown San Jose, right next to Plaza de Cesar Chavez Park. Inside, it wasn't as flashy as the big firms that once worked with my family, but everything was neat, solid, and felt discreet, like a silent fortress. Daniel Price was nothing like the lawyers I'd met back in finance. No silk ties, no slick appearance, no academic roundabout speech. He showed up in a simple white shirt, dark gray vest, his face intelligent but unhurried. He shook my hand firmly and invited me to sit at a walnut conference table beside an open computer, showing a map of international financial transactions. "Miss Carter at the bank gave me a brief overview," Daniel began, "but I want to hear everything directly from you, every detail, every first doubt, because if I'm right, we don't have much time." I told him about the first bank call, the meeting with Amy, the empty showrooms, the gardener's name, and the documents Caleb provided. Daniel listened intently, barely blinking. Occasionally he nodded or flipped through notes to mark timelines. When I stopped, he folded his hands in front of him, paused a few seconds, then spoke slowly. "Gianna, I reviewed some of Sterling Motors' transaction statements from the past year, and I think what you're facing is no longer isolated financial fraud. It's an organized series of actions aimed at moving assets out of U.S. jurisdiction before authorities can trace them." I looked at him, full of doubt and confusion. "You said the assets are being moved where?" Daniel turned the computer screen toward me. It showed a diagram of cryptocurrency flows, a blue line extending from Sterling Motors' account in California to trust funds in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and a credit institution in Luxembourg. The transfers were made through 3 layers of shell companies, registered under entities unrelated to Sterling but all sharing one common point. All supervisory documents were signed by Blake Sterling. I almost exclaimed, but Daniel raised his hand to signal me to wait. We found a series of internal emails between Blake and the company's legal department. But it doesn't stop there. Here, he opened an encrypted folder and pulled out a printed set of documents. This is what made me decide to file a motion with the court today. I took the papers and read. The bold, handwritten headline read, Ownership Restructuring Plan. Remove Gianna Sterling from all legal connections. Below was a summary of 4 phases. Use Gianna's signature to guarantee the market expansion loan. Push the entire loan into a controlled default status. Cut off financial and media ties by declaring Gianna mentally unstable. File for emergency guardianship if she reacts publicly, creating a legal basis to invalidate her signature. My hands trembled. They plan to declare me mentally unfit? Daniel nodded, his eyes losing the calm they had before. There's a draft letter to the California Department of Health, prepared by Richard's private attorney. It cites unstable symptoms, including nervous stress from caring for an autistic relative, a history of chronic insomnia, and depression after leaving the job. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I did see a doctor for insomnia because I had to care for Daniel nonstop for 18 months. They're using that against me? Not just using it, Daniel said, his voice suddenly hardening, but also preparing false testimony from 2 former employees, people who worked at the nonprofit where you volunteered. One of them had received funding from the Sterling Foundation. I leaned back in my chair, my mind tangled. So many years I lived quietly, avoiding conflict. Yet in their eyes, I was still an uncontrollable variable, someone to be eliminated, completely neutralized. Daniel gathered the files, put down his pen, and spoke in a deeper tone. Gianna, I'm not just a lawyer. I used to advise the federal prosecutor's office in Boston on investigations, and I've never seen a case where family members drew up a plan to legally declare a relative insane. I looked at him, no longer steady. What should I do now? We have filed an emergency motion to freeze Sterling Motors and Richard Sterling's assets within 24 hours. If approved, all transactions will be blocked, including monitored offshore funds. He paused, then spoke more slowly. But you also need to prepare, because after this step, they won't just threaten, they will act. I pressed my lips together, hands clenched in my lap. It felt like stepping into a battle where the enemy knows every crack in my soul, while I'm only just beginning to see the truth behind the curtain called family. But there's no turning back. No faith left to keep yielding. I asked only one question. When will the court respond to the freeze request? Daniel looked at me, eyes sharp as steel blades under warm light. By tomorrow morning at the latest. And if all goes well, your father will no longer be able to control everything from the shadows. I walked in, the wooden floor beneath my feet echoing with cold, sharp taps. The scent of cinnamon candles and ebony wood mixed into a suffocating unfamiliarity. I followed the old corridor toward the study, where light spilled through a slightly ajar door. Richard sat behind the oak desk, no greeting, no standing up. In front of him lay a brown leather envelope, a half-empty glass of scotch, and eyes sharp as knives. Sit down, he ordered, not looking at me. I sat, clutching my purse tightly, where I hid the small recording device Daniel gave me that morning. We're all tired, he said evenly, as if reading a quarterly report. Do you want your reputation justice, or peace, to live out the rest of your life without being dragged into this mess? He pushed the envelope toward me. $1 million, cash or wire transfer. In exchange, you sign a waiver releasing all civil and criminal liabilities related to Sterling Group, and absolutely no further involvement. I didn't touch the envelope. You want me silent because you fear losing reputation? No, he stared directly at me. Because if you dare show your face, I'll make the whole world believe you're crazy. I have old files from when your mother died, the crisis, anxiety prescriptions, all the times you cried from sleepless nights. I have enough to build a picture of an unstable, unreliable, and vulnerable Gianna. I smiled softly, sitting up straighter. Seems you've prepared well. Richard poured more whiskey. I'm just protecting the family. Sterling Group won't collapse just because a daughter lets emotions lead. Silence filled the room for long, suffocating seconds. Then from the left, Barbara stepped out. I didn't know how long she'd been there. Her hand trembled as she held a large white envelope. She approached and gently placed it on the table between Richard and me. I can't stay silent anymore, she said. Gianna needs to know. I opened the envelope. Inside were a series of internal payroll prints, financial Excel files, and photos of emails exchanged between Richard and the chief accountant. Cash flow adjustments, phantom inventory, familiar handwritten notes. I immediately recognized it as evidence of forged accounting, the exact copy I had been searching for the past 6 months. Barbara stepped back, eyes fixed on me. I once thought staying silent was the only way to protect the family, but I was wrong. Your mother would never forgive me if I let you be destroyed by blind loyalty. I looked at Richard. His face was pale, eyes showing real fear, but I said nothing, just gently placed my hand on my purse where the recorder was still running, and everything just began to shift. I sat in Daniel Price's office, the glass behind reflecting the city of Palo Alto swaying in the early sunlight. On the table was a stack of documents, densely marked with yellow, red, and blue sticky notes. Concrete evidence of financial fraud, fake asset declarations, covert transfers, and deliberately falsified tax records. Daniel sat opposite, tapping his fingers lightly on the table, eyes fixed on the wall clock. 9:03. Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg have received the soft copy. San Francisco Chronicle and CBS are ready for live broadcast. He looked up at me, his voice calm and steady. Once you agree, there's no turning back. I nodded. Let's begin. 2 hours later, a special press conference was held at the Marlowe Hotel. Under the cool white and blue stage lights, I sat between Daniel and Amy Carter, the bank officer who had helped me uncover all the initial loopholes. In front of us were over 30 reporters, representatives from the IRS, SEC, and several commercial banks involved in Sterling Motors' transaction chain. My name is Gianna Sterling, I began, my voice clear through the microphone, steady and confident. I am not here to seek revenge, but to protect what is right. Today I will present a series of evidence we have gathered over the past 6 months. This includes fictitious asset listings, forged internal contracts, and a large-scale scheme to circumvent laws and launder money through showrooms in Texas. Daniel continued, holding up stacks of documents and projecting detailed edited ledger pages onto the screen. A Houston showroom was reported to have 42 new cars, but satellite images from March showed only 6 cars parked outside, all old and non-operational. Another showroom in Austin was registered under the name of the gardener, Charles Hill, who, according to previous testimony, had never signed any legal documents in his life. Whispers stirred in the room. Amy pulled out a report reconciling credit accounts. A transfer of more than $2 million to the Cayman Islands was carried out through 5 steps, 3 of which were broken down under logistics expenses. The final approver, according to this document, is Richard Sterling. I glanced toward the back row where the SEC representatives exchanged brief looks. A man in a gray suit immediately pulled out his phone. Another opened a laptop. Just 30 minutes after the press conference ended, financial alert systems on analytical platforms began flashing messages. Sterling Motors, suspicious activity, trading halted. 15 minutes later, the company's accounts at 3 major banks were frozen by emergency court orders. The stock price dropped more than 30% within an hour and continued a steep decline. I received news that Blake, my younger brother, was urgently summoned. His name appeared in a series of contracts for market expansion in Texas. Daniel handed me a copy of an email. Blake, Sterling's signature appears on 12 financial documents, including 3 temporary asset transfer contracts, a form of profit concealment. At 1 p.m., the IRS office officially announced the launch of a federal tax fraud investigation into Sterling Group, along with a provisional list of individuals involved. I sat back in Daniel's office, no lighter inside, but silence replaced my fear. I had thought I was just an outsider, a child cut out from the perfect family picture, but now the truth was being exposed, not through tears, but through numbers, facts, and justice. I wasn't retaliating with hatred, I was simply restoring the truth to its rightful place, and I knew this game was far from over, but at least the curtain had been lifted. That morning, the Northern California federal courthouse was packed. Reporters from all over, from CNN and NBC to local stations, crammed into the back rows. I sat in the front row beside attorney Daniel and Amy Carter, who now felt like family. The atmosphere was tense. Even though the air conditioning was so cold, my hands trembled as I flipped through my notes. Judge Morton, a silver-haired man known for his strict but fair demeanor, entered, and the entire courtroom rose. He nodded, then sat, opening a thick file before him. The Sterling Group case and defendant Richard Sterling, final trial. His voice was deep and echoed through the silent room, as if everyone was holding their breath. Richard sat at the defendant's table, his dark gray suit wrinkled, hair no longer groomed like in the business magazine photos. He looked small and unbelievably out of place. As the prosecutor presented the entire chain of evidence, from transfers to the Cayman Islands to shell companies and forged ledgers, he showed nothing but a slow, furrowed brow. When the defense attorney stood, his voice was nearly pleading. "Your Honor, my client does not contest the charges. He accepts responsibility and asks for leniency due to deteriorating health and cooperation during the investigation." Judge Morton was silent for a moment. He flipped through several pages, then looked directly at Richard. "Richard Sterling, this court finds you guilty of federal financial fraud, tax record forgery, and illegal transfers through unauthorized territories. Sentence: 5 years federal prison without early parole and a civil damage compensation of $4,500,000. Effective immediately." The gavel struck sharply. The room fell silent for several seconds before murmurs resumed. Richard sat motionless. When the officers came to handcuff him, he only turned his head toward me, his eyes no longer cold, but hollow, like someone who had lost everything and no longer had the strength to regret. I said nothing. No anger remained, only a deep sadness, as if I were witnessing a monument silently crumble. After the trial, Judge Morton privately declared in the chambers, based on the ownership reconciliation documents, Gianna Sterling is fully exonerated and will regain all assets previously held indirectly or concealed during the investigation. This includes 3 showrooms in Texas, the trust held shares in the Sterling Investment Fund, and unpaid dividends from 2020 to present. I thanked him. Not because I needed those assets, but because justice had finally named the one excluded from all reports for 10 years. That evening, as I packed documents at the law office, a gentle knock came twice at the door. I looked up. It was Blake, my brother. He stepped in, no longer the arrogant Blake in designer suits I once knew. Today he was just Blake, the little brother who once fell asleep on my shoulder during long night shifts when Mom was working. He said nothing at first. He just placed a pale yellow envelope on my desk, the paper yellowed. "Found it in Mom's notebook box while cleaning," he said softly. "You should read it." I opened the letter. The handwriting was familiar. It was from Mom, addressed to me, written on the day she died, but never delivered. "Dear Gianna, if you are reading this letter, I am probably no longer with you. But I know you are strong. And you are smarter than anyone I've ever known. If one day you discover your father doing something wrong, do not remain silent. But do not seek revenge with fire. Use your intelligence and kindness to repair what your father has broken, not to keep this family name, but so you don't lose yourself." I set the letter down and looked up at Blake. He stood there, eyes red-rimmed, no longer siding with Richard, but as someone learning to apologize. "I was wrong," he whispered. "No words are enough, but if you can still make room for me, for family, I want to start over." I didn't answer immediately. I just stood, opened the door, and let Blake in. Because after all, some doors don't open with keys. They open with the courage to forgive others and yourself. The old Sterling Motors building on Franklin Avenue, once a symbol of power, now 7 months into renovation, had a completely new look. Towering glass walls replaced the old brick facade. Instead of Richard holding keys next to rows of luxury cars like the old posters, the lobby now displayed dozens of photos of people once pushed out of the family business with handwritten notes. Every story deserves to be heard. I stood in the middle of the lobby wearing a navy blue dress, a symbol Mom chose whenever she went to job interviews. Next to me was a large bronze plaque. Sterling Impact Fund, legal support fund protecting employees and family members in internal business disputes. Below it, smaller letters, founded by Gianna Sterling. I didn't create this fund to restore the Sterling family's honor. I did it for people like Amy Carter, the woman who quietly photocopied documents, risking her career to warn me. For Caleb Monroe, the man ousted from his director position just for speaking up, and for those never named in family meetings, never trusted simply because they dared to speak the truth. The grand opening ceremony had no champagne. We served hand-brewed coffee from a local shop and pastries from a bakery run by a single mother who was once fired from her in-laws' company after a divorce. As I stepped onto the small stage set in the lobby, I spotted Blake's face at the back, quietly nodding. Barbara was also there, her eyes no longer clouded but shining, as if someone had just been released from years of darkness. I held the microphone and looked around the bright room, once a private meeting space where my father had signed contracts to cut me out of all ownership structures. My voice was calm, no drama needed, because everyone here understood what I was about to say. I used to think family was where you had to stay silent to keep the peace. I once signed a contract just because I was told, trust your father. And then I was called crazy, blamed, and threatened with being institutionalized. But it was at that threshold I realized family is not a place where you're threatened for speaking the truth. I paused. The room fell utterly silent. I looked down at the front row, where former Sterling Motors employees sat side by side, old and young, some holding hands. The Sterling Impact Fund isn't meant to enrich anyone. It exists so no one has to fight a legal battle alone just because they're related to someone who did wrong. A small applause started, then grew louder. I bowed my head slightly and stepped down from the stage. As I stepped off, a young woman, about 20 years old, approached. She wore a faded hoodie, her eyes bright but shy. Mrs. Gianna, she said softly but firmly, my name is Eliza. I've followed your story on podcasts and in the news. Because of you, I dared to expose my stepfather for forging company documents and financially abusing my mother. I noticed her hand trembling slightly as she held mine. She didn't need to say more. I squeezed her hand and smiled. Then we start here. She broke down in tears, but not out of weakness, because she had reached the first step of a long journey. Someone once cornered, but still standing strong. I took her hand and led her into the lobby, where a plaque bearing the names of those the fund has helped was slowly lighting up line by line, like little stars on a map of a new world. A world where truth is no longer something to hide just to keep the so-called family. A world where we can rebuild relationships, not by blood, but through trust and right action. My story might have ended under the warm lights of a new fund, but I believe every listener and viewer carries their own shadows in the definition of family. Maybe you've been ignored in your own home. Maybe you stood before a table, forced silent for the sake of family honor. Or perhaps you were the one brave enough to speak and labeled a traitor. I share this journey not to accuse anyone, but to remind that the truth, even when painful, is the only path to healing. Family is not where we are forced to close our eyes and look away. It's where, when we dare to stand for what's right, someone will come, take our hand, and say, I am with you. What about you? What part of my story made you pause and reflect? Have you experienced something similar? Share your feelings and thoughts in the comments below, because your story might just be a light for someone else. And if you want to continue journeying with stories about family, betrayal, courage, and finding yourself, please subscribe to the channel, because behind every closed door, there's a story the world still needs to hear.